Max Holloway versus Brian Ortega. Now, what really happened in this fight? This was a shockingly very one-sided fight for the most part. Besides the third round where Brian Ortega was getting hit almost at will, Max Holloway broke the record for most strikes landed in a fight, and Ortega's defense was the biggest flaw. And we're going to have to point out what was that defensive flaw. Now, generally, Brian Ortega never really reacted too well to the straight right hand. And that also has to do with the way Max Holloway was throwing the right hand. He never telegraphed it. And there were instances where he would just take the stance just to pop it out there. Right? When you throw a right hand, you usually get on the ball of your rear foot, get the heel off, and rotate your hips almost to the point where they're square to the opponent, and you let the punch go. Sometimes Max Holloway just took that stance with ball of the foot on the ground and his hips are already facing Ortega and just throw out the right hand. Ortega never was able to see it coming. And Ortega, for the most part, he was using very big movements to get away from the short, quick strikes of Max Holloway. He was trying to lean heavy, pull on jabs, which isn't the best option. His movements really consist of pulling on the jabs, and it got to the point where he extended too far back, so he resorted to lean to his right heavily. That is the natural motion when you're an orthodox fighter. It usually happened when he wasn't orthodox. When he went to the southpaw, he was more attacking with the jab and the left hand, but he would switch stances constantly, and he would get stuck in the orthodox stance every single time, doing the same motion throughout the entire fight. He never changed it. And Holloway just used basic boxing fundamentals. Step forward with the jabs, saw out Brian Ortega as he stuck himself in that position and landed the right hand whenever he got the right angle. And the jabs of Max Holloway, he would usually move out to his left just to get the angle for the right hand, because when Ortega leans to his right, his shoulder can really block a straight right hand coming over the top. So if he moves to the left, now he has a clear target down the center for his right hand on the leaning Ortega. And Ortega didn't parry shots. He didn't move his feet a whole lot from the punches of Max Holloway. And him not parrying the shots of Holloway, Ortega never stopped the combinations of Max Holloway from flowing. They just kept going because he's just trying to evade with movement. He isn't stopping the actual combination. Holloway is a combination fighter with very high output, and his style is somewhat of a snowball effect. If you don't stop it, it's going to eventually turn to an avalanche, and the avalanche came in the fourth round. It built up through the entire fight. He allowed Max Holloway to put on the pressure more and more into the fourth round. It was just too late. And if he was to parry the jab of Max Holloway, which set up almost everything Holloway was doing, he would stop the momentum a lot sooner and more often. But he was trying to use big movements, hip movements, trunk movements, a lot of big head movements on the short, quick jabs, setups from Max Holloway, rather than slipping on the big shots of Holloway. He never really slipped or leaned or pulled on the right hand or the power punches of Holloway. It was on the setups, which is very ill-advised. Because if you're making big movements on setups, you just played right into the opponent's game of what they're trying to set up. They're trying to get you to move to a place where you completely expose yourself because of all the big movements, and now they seek you out with a power hand, and that was just the theme of the fight. And when Ortega found himself stuck and extended too far because of the big hip movements, he would resort to check hooks, very wide check hooks. And Holloway is throwing straight punches the entire fight. And what do you think happens when the straight, quick punches of Holloway is going to meet the looping hooks of Ortega, and especially as he's leaning? Holloway's winning every single time. Ortega didn't adjust to it often. Ortega's lack of footwork and heavy utilization of shoulder rolling, pulling, and ducking and leaning on quick setups made it way too easy for the tall Max Holloway, who doesn't extend himself forward, to seek with those step-ins and jabs and find his right hand at will. And another thing we have to note is the movement of Max Holloway. His movement was so smooth, so quick, and was perfect on timing. I mean, coincidentally, Vasily Lomachenko was fighting on the same night, and the movement he displayed in this fight was, I'm not going to push it to Lomachenko's level, but it was very impressive. It was very impressive. The angles he was taking at the time he was taking them on a switch fighter like Brian Ortega, that is very impressive. Whenever Ortega leaned over and he had to pivot out, or he just pivoted out because he was getting pressured by Holloway, Holloway would always switch to southpaw and track him down with an instant jab that gets set up from the sudden distance covered. Because when you switch stances forward, you're covering distance. You're covering a lot of distance, actually. It's almost like you're walking and taking a big step. And because of that, Ortega moves out to his left, and usually he would step left. He wouldn't take an L step. He would step left. A lot slower of a movement, a lot more unbalanced, and allowed Holloway to really track him down quickly. Never gave him the space or the position that Ortega wanted. And Ortega switching to southpaw, in theory it wasn't the best idea because Max Holloway was constantly throwing that right hand at him. He was stepping off to the outside, even stepping off to the left when Ortega was an orthodox. So that should tell Ortega, if he takes a southpaw stance, that right hand that was landing at will on him orthodox is going to open up a lot more on him when he takes southpaw. And that showed to be true as well for the most part. And Ortega was trying to use the Philly shell stuff, elbow defense, hands on the side when he took the southpaw stance. And Holloway was still able to land that right straight down the middle because he naturally just took the same motion. Same thing he was doing against the orthodox Ortega with stepping to the left and setting up for the right hand. He was doing it even more on the southpaw, of course. Ortega wasn't making the necessary adjustments in the fight. And this defense of Ortega is very present in his entire career. I would think he would have developed something different. The straight punches of Holloway is something he's always known for, right? His punches are always tight. And blocking like something's going to come out wide was not the right game plan. And Ortega has come out and said that he doesn't really game plan for opponents. He just goes out there and fights and feels it out in there to see what the opponent's going to do. And I think studying Max Holloway would have done a lot of benefits to get some of his game down. Because some of the things Holloway was doing here, he does it to everybody. But let's go through some of the interesting moments of what Holloway did and some of what Ortega did in there. So we move here in the first round, and what you see is, notice Brian Ortega's footwork here, how he's moving to his left. Look how narrow he gets his stance. He steps forward with his back foot before his lead foot, standing very straight, and the time it takes him to get back into his stance is going to be that much longer, and Holloway's going to be able to capitalize. Holloway shows his left hand and steps to the left with it, makes it look like he's going to throw a jab, and Ortega takes the bait. He goes and parries, and notice how he turns his head to the left. Holloway steps with his right foot, gets into stance, and actually now throws a jab, and look at the angle he's at. His left foot is almost cutting off the right side of Ortega, and his right foot is on a line between Ortega's feet. He already has a very good angle for the right hand. But he goes and throws a jab to measure for it, and Ortega turns his head completely away to the point where he's not even looking at Holloway, and he puts his hand over to deflect it. He extended himself way too much to the left, now he has to move his feet. This is exactly what Holloway wanted. And with the jab, notice Holloway hops to his left, gets completely perpendicular to Brian Ortega. This is one of the best angles you can ever have to land your straight right hand on the same stance fighter. And Ortega is going to have to move his feet here. He goes and moves his right foot around, tries to pivot, tries to swing it around to get into stance to face Holloway. This is why moving your feet when you extend yourself, it's too late. It's too slow to get away from any punch. The punch is going to come way quicker before Ortega can get back into his stance with footwork and retracting the overextension with his hip movement. And he gets caught clean by this right hand as he almost crosses his feet. I mean, Holloway's footwork was so on point for this fight. And now we move here, and this is one of the biggest shots Ortega was able to land in the entire fight. Now they're in opposite stances. And because of this, Holloway's going to try to get his foot on the outside to measure and find his right hand. Ortega puts his right hand forward to trap the lead hand of Holloway, so Holloway can't really throw the jab anymore. This is why it's hard to utilize the jab when fighters are in opposite stances. So Holloway's going to have to try to find his right hand, and he resorts to the quote-unquote outside foot advantage. So he goes and throws his hand up, makes it look like he's going to throw a jab, uses that to mask in his step on the outside, and he actually hops and lands on his rear foot and launches forward off it before he's able to land with his lead foot, gets on the outside, but Ortega actually switches stances backwards. This completely throws off the accuracy or the target. The target is now different for Holloway, mid-attack. This is not good for Holloway. So Holloway, when he goes in and tries to throw the left hook as he launched himself, he steps with his rear foot very close to Ortega, and notice Ortega has his left hand up on the left side expecting some kind of hook, and then he puts his right hand forward right before he gets into the orthodox stance, measures Holloway coming in, and as Holloway closes in the distance, and look how close he gets, Holloway's trying to measure for his right hand, so he puts his left hand forward, but Ortega does what he usually does when he gets to the orthodox stance. He leans to his right, gets his head on the outside of the jab, and lands a huge left elbow over the top as Holloway's digging in for the right hand. You could just see how off that punch of Holloway was, because the switching of stances of Ortega mid-attack for Holloway completely threw off what the target was and how he was going to get to that target. Now we move into the second round, and what you see from Holloway's footwork is something completely out of this world. Only fighter I've ever seen that utilizes or can utilize something like this is maybe TJ Dillashaw or even Dominic Cruz. So Holloway starts switching stances in front of Ortega as Ortega's covering up, giving different kind of looks to him. And he's waiting for Ortega to throw out something. So he's going to keep doing this to get something out of Ortega and then capitalize on that moment. So when he gets into the orthodox stance, Ortega goes and throws a jab. And Holloway's distance management is just way too good. It's just too good at the end of the day. He's able to just slightly move his head on the inside of the punch. This is something Ortega does not do. Look at how slight the movement was for Holloway compared to what Ortega was doing. Ortega was using big movements on something like this, and actually his jab is way bigger of a punch. It's way more of a expending energy of a punch than Holloway's was. And Holloway was able to just move very slightly on the inside and able to capitalize on that moment, because when you make big movements on punches, it takes that much longer to get back and try to counter or get an angle on the opponent, because the movement you make, you got to retract it as well if you're coming back to the target. And Holloway goes and throws a right hand, doesn't throw it too hard, gets right behind Ortega, and Holloway goes and throws a pretty lunging of a left hand and hops himself to the left a little bit, gets him right into a sideways stance to Ortega, and this shows he's ready to attack forward on Ortega. And he goes down for the right hand as Ortega usually goes and tries to counter him with a check left hook. And notice when Ortega throws a check left hook, his entire body's facing the right side. There's a lot of power coming into this left hook, but straight punches do beat these looping punches. Look at how Holloway was able to land on Ortega before Ortega was able to land on Holloway, and Holloway just gets grazed by the punch because he doesn't overextend with his punches. And because of this, Ortega is now moving backwards, right? He threw the left hook, his body's facing to the right, so he tries to backtrack to the left. And what did I say about Holloway? Whenever Ortega's trying to move laterally, Holloway's going to move out to his right and switch it to southpaw to cut him off and track him down. Exactly what he does here. Gets his foot on the outside due to switching stances and just follows Ortega. And what does he usually do? Sets up that jab because of the distance he's covering naturally with the switch of stances. Ortega is trying to parry the shots. He's trying to move back. He's in such close range to Max Holloway. Moving backwards faster than your opponent moving forward is very hard to do. And Holloway just setting up for that left hand. So he goes and throws another jab. And Ortega pretty shockingly goes and changes levels for a single leg. Now this is crazy about Max Holloway. His distance management and his ability to read his opponent so quickly is so amazing. When Ortega goes down and changes levels for the single leg, what does Max Holloway do? He doesn't extend for the left hand like it looks like he was going to commit for. He literally switches stances right there and then. Completely threw off the takedown of Ortega. The timing of Holloway is something extraordinary. To be able to do this that quickly is something you never see in MMA. And because of this, Holloway didn't have to sprawl, he didn't have to drive in a whizzer or anything. He just olayed Ortega right past him. Because Ortega's trying to go for the right leg of Holloway because he was in the southpaw position moving forward, so he was trying to attack that leg. Because he switched his stance so suddenly, Ortega never caught onto it. So he went for that right leg and all of a sudden it's too far away. So Holloway just guided him across. That was one of the moments in the fight that was just showed that Holloway is on a different level. And then we move later into the second round and Ortega's in his southpaw stance, Holloway's in his orthodox stance. This usually tells that Ortega's going to come on the attack. So he leans to his right and looks for the left hand. Ortega extended on the left hand and he switched stances into the orthodox stance because of all the leverage, all the momentum moving forward of that punch threw him into the other stance. Holloway with a very slight movement, remember he's moving on a big punch from Ortega, slips on the outside of it, puts his left hand forward on top of Ortega to measure for his right hand, and he moves back. He actually moves his lead foot back before his rear foot, which is backwards. When he put his hand on top of Ortega to measure for his right hand, he goes and tries to counter Ortega right across as Ortega overextended with the left hand. And Ortega was able to get up an uppercut before that happened, which maybe got his head out of the way. This is something Conor McGregor does to most people, right? He's able to slip on the overextended punches and return with his left hand. But the thing why McGregor is able to do that and Holloway wasn't able to be successful in it here is because the footwork. McGregor never makes mistakes with his footwork. Almost never, right? In this case, he would have took one step back with his rear foot because he does have a pretty long stance as it is. One step back with his rear foot and then land the left hand. Holloway moved his lead foot first and then his rear foot, which makes it take a lot of time before he gets into his stance so he could throw the punch. To throw a punch backwards, he has to get that rear foot on the ground. But it came after the lead foot, which made it a lot longer for him to get balance and sit on his punch. So if he moved his back foot first and then his lead foot, he probably would have landed his punch a lot earlier in this exchange. Just a mistake on basic footwork lost him the opportunity to potentially land a huge punch to hurt Ortega. But they both go and miss, and surprisingly, Holloway doesn't retract his stance. He doesn't get back, right? He stays where he threw the punch. And now Ortega is in his orthodox stance. Holloway goes and fakes like he's going to pop it out right from there, and Ortega takes the bait. He goes and puts his right hand forward like he was going to parry it, and he tries to counter him with a left hook, as he usually does. So Holloway waited for it, saw Ortega was going to throw the left hook, and he just goes and throws the right hand down the middle. And again, the straight punches beat those looping punches, and another great example of that, and move away because Holloway doesn't overextend on his punches, and notice the stance he took. He just has to pop it out there, just like he did many times in the fight. Then we move into the third round, and what you see is both in the same stance, both in orthodox. And notice Max Holloway's stance and what he's constantly doing. He keeps leaning forward. He keeps squaring up his shoulders and hips to Brian Ortega. It almost looks like he's going to take that stance where he could just pop out the right hand without telegraphing it. And there's a flaw with taking that stance. When you take that stance, it's very hard to lean back or move back because your entire body is leaning and facing forward. And if you keep on the ball of your rear foot, you can't put weight on it because the heel's not on the floor. If you have your heel on the floor, you can put more weight on it and lean to that side. So Ortega just goes out and throws a left hook, and Holloway can't move away from it effectively. He moves his right foot to the side, but he can't lean back on it yet. So he's forced to block the punch and be in range for Ortega, which is a very rare occurrence. Holloway very effectively blocks it, his timing's on point, and he tries to counter him with a safe and tight jab. This is an excellent counter on paper, but Ortega is lunging with his punches. He's moving very rapidly with these punches, so when he throws a left hook, he gets a little bit to the right. He goes and follows up with a right straight, which you'll see later in one of the other moments that he constantly throws. And when he throws the right hand, he really digs in with it, so he gets off the center line, which gets him away on the inside of the jab of Holloway, which forces both punches to miss. As Ortega's punch goes right under the jab, it gets deflected by the arm. And look at that overextension. Holloway is almost facing his back at this point, and Holloway sees it. He sees an opening. I gotta take this shot. It's wide open for me. Holloway bounces back from the momentum and the leverage of the punch of Ortega and sits on this punch. His entire body's leaning forward, flares out his right elbow, which probably slows down the punch just a split second, and he goes and throws out that right hand, and you can see he really wanted to commit with it. He saw the huge opening because he really threw himself forward. You never see Holloway overextend himself on his punches, and this time he did. And when he was throwing out the right hand, Ortega's right foot was swinging back to get into stance so he can face Holloway again, like before, and he very quickly slips on the inside. This is a very fast movement from Brian Ortega. He always had that quick movement, but he was using the same movement on jabs, on very fast and small punches. This time, he did it on a big punch of Holloway successfully. This is what you wanted to see more from Ortega. Big movement on the big punch of Holloway that he overextended on. And look how low Ortega gets as usual, almost to the hips of Holloway, but this time he's setting up something different. So Holloway's moving forward, he runs into the body of Ortega, and Ortega goes over with the spinning back elbow, right over the top, catches Holloway, looks like to the back of the head. Of course, it's on accident, he's not meaning to land the back of the head, he's not even looking at Holloway, he just sees Holloway throw the right hand, ducked under it, throws a spinning back elbow, and lands clean. But here's the thing, these two guys are so tough, a shot like this would have stunned or backed off many fighters. Holloway and Ortega are special in that if you land these shots, they are still just gonna be there. So Holloway eats the spinning back elbow, marches forward with the same momentum that he ran into Ortega with. Ortega span into southpaw and finally faces Holloway, and Holloway's already lunging forward for a huge left hook, and he gets caught clean, completely unexpected by this left hook. And just how Holloway ate that spinning back elbow, Ortega ate that left hook. I mean, this is insane. So then we move here, and Ortega's moving forward. He was in the southpaw stance. He switches to orthodox, and at the same time, he leans to his right. This was very ill-advised. He gave the angle that Holloway wanted to see. He just gave it to him. So what does Holloway do? He just throws the right hand and catches him. And Holloway, very good. He didn't overextend this time. He just popped it out there, connected clean on Ortega, and then he fades out to his right behind the punch. And Ortega goes and throws a jab, and he doesn't step forward effectively with it. He kind of just forces his body over to try to connect with it, reach out with the jab. Just misses Holloway. Holloway takes an L step to his right afterward, and he gets the wheels moving out to his right. So Ortega starts hopping with him. It was almost like he followed his rhythm. So he starts hopping to his left like he's going to eventually track down Holloway. Holloway makes a sudden stop and throws out a jab, which catches Ortega. And you can see the momentum of Ortega is still moving to his left. And he gets into the parallel stance to Holloway because of that. And Holloway lands a clean right hand on Ortega openly. Ortega tries to answer back. He throws a right hand, then left hand, and look how he's leaning forward. He's reaching out with these punches instead of moving his feet with them. You're never going to catch Holloway doing this. Holloway moves back on the punches. He's able to retract his right hand very quickly and gets his wheels moving again. And as soon as Ortega takes a southpaw stance, Holloway starts slowing down his movement and he starts trapping the lead hand of Ortega right away. He's so aware in there. As soon as he saw the switch of stances, he changed his method now. Trapping the lead hand, maybe trying to force out the power hand of Ortega, capitalize on that moment, but when he goes and starts trapping the lead hand, Ortega actually walks forward a little bit, gets very close to Holloway, so then Holloway traps the left hand of Ortega as well. Throws it down a little bit and comes right over the top with the right hand quickly. Very short right hand that catches Ortega clean. He moves out away from the power hand of Ortega, moves out to his left, creates some distance for himself, puts his hands forward, and he traps both hands of Ortega. It's the same game again, except Ortega takes the orthodox stance this time. And he knows Ortega likes to lean to his right whenever he takes an orthodox stance. It's a natural motion for most boxers out there. So instead of throwing the right hand this time, which usually catches southpaw fighters easily because of the opening on it, he goes and throws a right elbow over the top. And just in case Ortega leans that direction, it's still going to catch him. It's coming on its way down. And again, he moves out away from the power hand afterward of Ortega. And Ortega actually throws it this time. Goes and throws out the right hand. Holloway's always moving away from the power shots. After he lands his big strike, gets his wheels moving again. Then we move to the end of the third round, and this is probably the biggest shot from Brian Ortega. So he goes and starts walking forward, gets into the orthodox stance. Holloway posts on Ortega to measure distance. Ortega goes and throws a looping left hook. Holloway's on it. He blocks it effectively. And it looked like Ortega was trying to follow up with the right hand, but Holloway's moving back. He moves away when he posted, and the right hand is just not in distance, so Ortega doesn't fully commit with it. But Ortega really threw his shoulder over. He overextended a little bit, even with a fake. I mean, look how perpendicular his body is to Holloway's. Holloway does have a shot here, but this same opening presented itself before. So maybe this time Holloway didn't go to it, right? He didn't have a good feeling about it, but I think rather than throwing a right hand, a left hand would be better, knowing what Ortega did before. Right, he leans to his right afterward. And Ortega is leaning a little bit to his left, right? His feet aren't all the way under him. He's standing very straight. So can he really move out that direction that quickly? I don't know, but his natural motion is to lean to his right afterward. So Holloway, I think, would have had a potential opening for a left hook here instead of throwing the right hand. And if he threw a left hook and Ortega tries to duck to his right like he usually does after he throws these punches, he could have potentially ran into the left hook of Holloway. But Holloway just doesn't throw anything. He just lets Ortega be, which allows Ortega to keep the pressure on and keep the combination going. Ortega goes up for the right uppercut, and Holloway's just moving back. Now Ortega got almost into a parallel stance, and now Holloway found his shot. Holloway goes and tries to counter Ortega with the straight right hand. He flares out his elbow again. The same time, Ortega's trying to switch into orthodox. And again, Ortega leans on the inside. He leans on the inside of the punch. Big movement on the big punch. And threw a left hook over the top. The same combination that he has thrown many, many times in this fight. And he actually connects on Holloway. Even though Holloway threw a straight punch, it comes over the top. But the fact that Holloway threw a straight punch, the left hook of Ortega actually decreases in impact because it gets caught on the arm over the shoulder of Holloway. So not too much power got delivered. And Ortega follows up with the same straight right hand down the middle right inside the guard of Max Holloway. And this catches him clean. This is probably the biggest strike of Brian Ortega in the entire fight. Seemed to rattle Max Holloway a bit. He did this combination twice. He did it before, the right hand wasn't in distance, so he had to get into distance, and once Holloway threw the right hand, that is when he got in distance. Ortega, knowing that his left hand connected, touched Max Holloway, he knows now his right hand is going to be able to touch Holloway as well. But Holloway has to stay in space, so Holloway throwing out a big right hand stuck himself in the space. That is how Ortega was able to keep the distance and connect meaningfully. So that's the end of the breakdown, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you enjoyed my content, make sure to subscribe. For my next video, it will be the podcast. It's going to come out tomorrow because this breakdown did take me some time. So be on the lookout for that. And again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.